Good evening and welcome to Political Scope. This evening's program will focus on the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Amendment Bill, currently before a special select committee of Parliament. My name is Edward Lane, and with me in the studio today to discuss the Anti-Money Laundering Bill is the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Anil Nandlall. Minister, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
This bill would have been before that special select committee since earlier this year. I know the committee would have been on a pause or a recess since I think for a 2 months period from August 10. I know the committee has reconvened last Monday, that's October 14. You had one meeting. A meeting was scheduled for Monday, October 21. Could you give us a general update as it relates to the status of the bill in the committee and maybe what came out of those two meetings?
To put the matter in context, Eddie, perhaps I should begin by recapping what happened immediately prior to Parliament going into recess. You would recall that the bill was transmitted to a special select committee for that committee to review certain aspects of the bill. The decision to take the bill to a select committee was one engineered by the opposition using their votes in the National Assembly. They voted for that eventuality to take place. One would have expected, therefore, that one would have seen great alacrity in the participation of the opposition in that select committee. Unfortunately, since the bill has been in the select committee for in excess of 6 months now, the opposition members of that committee has engaged in innumerable strategies and tactics, all designed to delay and frustrate the committee from concluding its work. It is important at this juncture that I emphasize that Guyana was supposed to have submitted a report to the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force on August the 26th, and indeed has submitted such a report. Unfortunately, we could not have included in that report, as we were required to do, that the bill, which is in the select committee, was passed into law. Recall when I went to the CFATF meeting in May, I had given an undertaking that it will be passed by the November meeting. And pursuant to that undertaking, Guyana is required to have submitted this report on August the 26th, when in that report we ought to have disclosed that that bill has been passed. Hence, the drive behind the urgency which the government members in that committee have put into the work of that committee, so that we could have concluded the bill. The committee could have concluded its work, and the bill would have been transmitted back to the National Assembly and hopefully passed. Unfortunately, all government's efforts to expedite the work of that committee has been thwarted and rejected essentially by the tactics and strategies employed by the opposition members. For example, they absented themselves from a whole host of meetings, and when they actually presented themselves to the meeting, the rare occasions that they did so, all they were engaged in were filibustering tactics, and tactics that were essentially to frustrate the work that the government members would have accomplished in their absence. Eventually, a few days before Parliament concluded, it was still the expectation of the government at least the government side in the select committee, to have concluded the work of that committee. And in fact, we did so. And we had a draft report prepared, which would have been taken to the National Assembly for the National Assembly's adoption and passage of the bill. For the first time in weeks, the opposition members came out in all their numbers and, using the majority vote which they have on that committee, essentially torpedoed all the work which we did, rejected the report which was prepared, rejected our motion to take that report up to the National Assembly, and adjourned the meetings of the committee to a date after the recess. In other words, essentially rejecting all the work that we would have done and which they deliberately and for no sensible reason absented themselves from. Upon the resumption of the sittings of Parliament, upon the resumption of Parliament coming out of the recess, as per the decision of the opposition in the Select Committee, we convened a meeting, a first meeting of the Select Committee on the 14th of October, last Monday, and Mr. Ramjatan from the Alliance for Change again has not shown up. Ms. Deborah Bakker from the APNU was absent. Present were Mr. Basil Williams, Mr. Joseph Harmon, and Mr. Carl Greenidge. Nothing was accomplished at that meeting. Again, with uniformity and consistency, they resumed their efforts at frustrating the work which was already done, asking a whole host of questions that hardly made sense, and attempted to get explanations from the government members in respect of what transpired before in the committee, though they were supposed to have been there and without any proper and good reason absented themselves. So the delaying, detaining tactics continued with the same consistency that they were employed with prior to Parliament going into recess. We, on the government side, endured all the strategies which were being employed, and we persevered with the work of the committee during that first meeting. When the meeting came to an end, as I said, nothing much was accomplished. The date for the second meeting now became a very, very heated issue. Of course, the government side wanted the earliest possible date, which included the Tuesday, the Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday. All those days were rejected, one after the other, by the opposition. And they chose the 21st, which was the following Monday, that's today's date, for that meeting. At or about 1 p.m. this afternoon, the chairman of the committee, Comrade Gail Teixeira, was informed that the meeting by the opposition members, APNU members, that the meeting will no longer take place, that it is not convenient for them to meet. So the opposition have demonstrated, both the Alliance for Change and the APNU, that they are not interested in passing this bill. The private sector has issued a statement recently. They had issued statements earlier. The Manufacturers Association has issued statements. The Georgetown Chamber of Commerce has issued statements. The trade union movement has issued a statement. The Berbice Chamber of Commerce and the Upper Quarantine Chamber of Commerce has issued a statement. The Insurance Association has issued a statement. All the important stakeholders in this country, in the commercial sector, have individually and collectively issued statements calling upon the opposition to ensure that this bill is passed and outlining the draconian consequences which will ensue if this bill is not passed. All those statements, all those appeals obviously have been disregarded and rejected by the opposition.
But bearing all of this in mind, and you had one meeting which you said nothing much came out of. The opposition using indicated, APNU in particular indicated that today, October 21 meeting could not have been convened because it's not convenient to them.
And they
Did they set another date for the meeting?
Firstly, they fixed that date. They requested that date and time. And when we were approaching the time, today itself, they called to indicate their unavailability. A meeting is fixed for tomorrow afternoon at 4:30. That's the 22nd of October at 4:30 again. We will see whether they show up. The fundamental truth is that the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force has already prepared a draft report which will constitute the mutual evaluation report of Guyana. And in the conclusion of that report, Guyana is scheduled to be declared a non-compliant jurisdiction. And member states worldwide are invited to implement against Guyana such countermeasures that they deem necessary to protect themselves and their business entities within their respective jurisdictions from the money laundering and terrorism risks which Guyana will pose, unless we are able to walk with that bill in hand, passed into law at the November meeting. Then we will not be able to prevent that draft report from being adopted.
No,
and when that draft report is adopted, it becomes a final report, and that will be
but that was my next question.
the position in respect of Guyana.
The meeting is in November. We were in October.
We are in the end
of October.
The last week of October.
The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force would have set a date as August 26th for Guyana to submit that report and to indicate in that report that the Parliament would have passed the amendments. How much of a weight, so to speak, will presenting the bill on the day of that meeting or during that meeting will have in terms of preventing Guyana from not being sanctioned?
It is not even a guarantee. Presenting the bill on that day is not even a guarantee. But at least it is something that we can present to the forum which can have the impact of putting on hold the adverse statements which will emanate from Guyana, emanate against Guyana from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. At the May plenary meeting, Dominica was in this identical position. The Dominican Attorney General presented the bill passed into law for and on behalf of Dominica and was able to put the imposition of sanctions and the issuance of an adverse statement against Dominica on hold until they review the bill and see that it meets the recommendations and the requirements which it ought to meet. So that is the only window of opportunity left open for Guyana. The truth is that somehow, illogically and irrationally, the opposition, I believe, and I can only surmise, that they have concluded that if Guyana is imposed, if Guyana, is sanctioned in the manner contemplated, that somehow only the government will face the brunt of the drastic consequences and ramifications which are going to come. The truth of the matter is that every single person in this country will be affected, including the supporters of both opposition parties, including the business sector of this country. So I don't know what rationale is being used by the opposition to justify what I can only describe as their inexplicable and illogical position on this matter.
But as it relates to, you keep referring to the opposition as a whole. Judging from the input and the discussions in the Special Select Committee, what is the Alliance for Change, the Alliance for Change's position, taking them as a political party but not the entire opposition together?
The Alliance for Change position, as I understand it from utterances made at their press conference, their position is that unless the public procurement is established, they are not going to support the anti-money laundering bill. The establishment of the Procurement Commission has absolutely no connection and no nexus whatsoever with the bill in relation to money laundering. None at all. And for them to make such a connection cannot be rationalized in principle or in logic. They are obviously engaged in political horse trading. They are oblivious, or they want to remain oblivious, to the consequences that the Guyanese people will have to bear when these sanctions are imposed on Guyana.
And what about the APNU? What is the individual position?
The APNU position seemed to be that they are portraying out in the public a position through their leader, Mr. David Granger, who keeps saying in the press, or is reported in the press as saying, that the APNU's priority is a good bill. But that's a good thing to say, except that you don't get a good bill by some magical incantation. You get a good bill by working to produce a good bill. When you juxtapose his public utterances to what transpires in the Select Committee and what his members are doing in the Select Committee, you see that they are ocean apart, because they are doing nothing in the Select Committee which will conduce to the production of a quote-unquote good bill. They are not making any proposal. All they are doing is asking questions that sometimes hardly make sense. No, not a singular proposal has come from the opposition members about what they would like to see in the bill. At least it has not come in writing so that the committee can properly look at it, review it, and consider its implementation.
You said recently, you were quoted in sections of the press recently as saying Trinidad attempted to impose some sanctions on Guyana. What does that mean? Because if Trinidad would have moved in that direction, it is a clear indication of what to come if should Guyana fail to meet that November deadline.
The Trinidad Central Bank unfortunately formed the inadvertent opinion that Guyana was indeed blacklisted by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force and issued a statement to the business community in Trinidad to that effect. Immediately, Guyanese businesses that were transacting commerce and other business transactions with their Trinidad counterparts started to be subjected to a whole host of scrutiny and problems were encountered, bringing transactions between the two territories almost to a complete halt. I speak of the banks, I speak of the insurance companies, I speak of the wire transfer agencies, I speak of importers and exporters, buying and selling goods, etc., across the two borders. Fortunately, the matter was brought to our attention, and the Honorable Minister of Finance quickly dispatched a letter to Trinidad and corrected the misplaced notion that Guyana had suffered the imposition of these sanctions officially. So, but it's important because it gives one the impression of what will happen if we are blacklisted, as it is popularly described. Because whatever problems Guyanese businesses encountered during that brief period with Trinidad will be replicated in respect of every country with which Guyana is currently conducting commerce and trade with. So you have universal sanctions. So commerce in Guyana will be severely affected, and many business relationships will come to a halt, come to an end.
Minister, we quickly running out of time, but Parliament is to reconvene quite soon. In terms of getting this bill through the Special Select Committee, how optimistic are you? Do you intend to, and when I say you, I mean the government, intend to maybe have some sort of dialogue outside of the Special Select Committee to try to meet some sort of consensus so that when Parliament reconvenes, the bill could at least be be completed in the Select Committee and be before the House of Passage?
I am aware that the Office of the President has been duly updated in terms of the developments which have recently taken place at the Special Select Committee, and whether there are going to be extra parliamentary engagements between the opposition and the government would be a remit of the Office of the President, and that decision will be made there. Speaking as a member of the committee and speaking for and on behalf of my colleagues in the committee, we cannot avoid but be optimistic. We have no other alternative. And to continue to diligently and assiduously work to ensure that we discharge our obligations to the people of Guyana. What parliamentarians must understand is that when they go to discharge their parliamentary functions and when they sit in that edifice called the National Assembly or Parliament building, we are not there to advance and persecute our personal agendas, vendettas, and vindictive pursuits. We are there to do only one thing, and always to do one thing, which is to always act, to always advance a position which is in the best interest of every Guyanese citizen and what is in the best interest of the welfare of Guyana. That is our only mandate. There is no way that the opposition can justify, can even begin to present a case which would tend to suggest that not passing this bill within the time prescribed is something that a single Guyanese can benefit from. This will be disastrous for Guyana and all its people, and therefore this should never be a position that the opposition should have any form of equivocation on, and this should not be a matter that should be the subject of any form of political horse trading.
Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, the Honorable Anil Nandlall, I want to thank you very much, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Have a good rest of the evening.